Coming from Brisbane was, you were expected to make excuses for it.
We go down to Sydney at least once or twice a year to catch some bands down there. And yeah, they looked at you as rednecks and hillbillies. But once you got to know some of the real people down there, they'd come out and they'd sort of say, how do you do it? How do you live up there?
It had a bit of a stigma about us being the big country town, you know, where, you know, all those hicks live.
I used to go to Melbourne, people used to say, well, why do you live in Brisbane? I used to say, well, you don't walk away from a fight, you know, I mean, there's unfinished business, and, you know, there's people to be got.
They've got all those police that roam the streets and arrest people.
That very narrow, very confining, very bigoted.
The possibilities in Brisbane were bigger than the possibilities anywhere else because there was nothing and everything you did was important, you know.
You just kept to your bedrooms and the handful of friends you had. That was it. And that's when punk happened. It was just a release.
I think that Brisbane is the punk rock capital of the world. It fit in with our sort of age, I suppose. We're just of that age group where we're, you know, coming out of school and, you know, pretty excitable sort of young guys anyway, I suppose.
There's a real do or die identity to what the Brisbane punk scene was about. And unfortunately, some of them, they did, and they died.
It's great to be different.
To find yourself at a gig and realising there are a lot more of you around.
I think Brisbane was, in more ways than one, probably the place to be around that time.
I suppose there's a lot of icons you could stick there, like, you know, the film clip, you know, I'm stranded up at Petrie Terrace.
Importantly, I think out of that particular era was the stamping of something as culturally here.
Put an identity to what it was like to be young and reckless in those times.
Punk rock just fitted perfectly with the way the socio-political scene was around Brisbane. It was a police state.
Punk was for the people, you know, punk was good. In a way, it was kind of like musical communism.
We were actually sort of at the forerunners there of the whole postmodernism thing, you know, just tearing everything down.
There was no real idea of cool. It was just getting out there and doing it.
We couldn't have had a band like the Black Assassins in Sydney because it would have, you know, been just so uncool.
We broke all the rules, you know, like my personal motto was to break every single rule that I came across.
Can't help but always correlate it in my mind to all that other stuff that was going on at the same time, and who was in government, and you know, how we were as a city then.
At a street level, you know, you knew that things weren't all going swimmingly.
The music and the politics sort of all got mixed up.
It was a fairly harsh environment.
There was this sort of sense where Bjelke Peterson loved to have a demon, you know. I think it's part of his, you know, sort of fundamentalist Christian sort of mindset.
Brisbane had such a strong political agenda, and people were genuinely angry, and so a lot of the people out and about were also in the Communist Party and were the militant feminists.
Punk was this perfect demon because it was, you know, avowedly the other and wanted to be different and wanted to be disrespectful.
Politically charged time, but you didn't always feel safe going out, you know, you always had to watch out.
It just seemed to be a licence for football thugs to come after you, you know, like you'd be out at night and guys would be yelling out at you from buses or actually, you know, waiting for you in gangs near the toilets or whatever and just telling you what you need was good fucking.
The police didn't like us because we were too different, and they couldn't really understand it.
They made it their business, I suppose, if you like, to take the music scene very seriously, i.e. punk rock and inverted commas.
The cops showed up and there was 5 paddy wagons outside the practice room, and they dragged us all up to the old Caxton Street barracks up there. And they worked me over with a phone book and writing out my confession in front of me as I was rubbing all the bruises.
One of the things the police regularly used to do, and on any given weekend, you know, you had people you could visit, in the mental institutions, they regularly used to lock people up. They just scoop you up off the street. We
met the Stranglers, and you know, one of the first overseas punk bands to come to Brisbane. And because we were used to it, I suppose, but when we started explaining what was happening with Peterson and the whole National Party government, they were flabbergasted. And they just said, why can't you do something? And I think after they saw a little bit of the action from the Queensland Police, they understood it was a bigger job than a bunch of little snotty-nosed kids from the suburbs could do anything about.
Brisbane has got a very proud tradition of punk rock.
I'm really proud of the Brisbane punk scene. A band called The Saints is attributed in some sources as being one of the first punk bands in the world.
Brisbane's always produced awesome punk bands and hardcore bands.
The impact that it does have isn't very tangible. There's not a lot where you can actually point and go, the change has been made through this. I think what changes have been made have been through the attitudes of young people coming through and hearing a different voice.
They pushed boundaries and had a voice that's been heard.
4ZZZ gave punk a voice, and punk gave 4ZZZ a really good identity.
Rebellion against the government at the time. I think that's what punk's always been.
I think you look at the 80s especially, extremely conservative era with Reaganism, Thatcherism going on around the world, and in Brisbane especially again. I think right now there's been a swing back towards sort of that sort of conservative attitude around the world and locally as well.
They reckon punk rock died when it sold its first record.
It's gone through a few waves since the early 80s.
It's different for everyone, and whatever it is that makes them call themselves punk rock, they call it that because it makes them feel better, or they've found something that fits them like a glove for their musical needs or something.
I feel better about myself being in a band, just being able to express, views that you just don't get in the mainstream media.
It's like there's no forms of expression other than them quietly and in the corner of a cafe or something like that.
Gives people a chance to get up on stage and smack the crappers out of their instruments once a month and scream their anxieties and angers out. And
it's real, it's talking about issues, it's fun, it's good.
I think the big strength of punk rock is the music, the sound, the energy, the fun.
I don't ever think it's going to die, definitely not. It's had its stagnant moments, and it's up times and highs and lows and whatnot. But it's whatever that they're going to make it, and at the moment it's looking okay.
It's hope for sort of the younger kids coming up, growing up and getting into something sort of like slightly different or whatever.
People don't want to come out and see bands. People don't want to think about issues. They don't want to go out and protest. They want to sit and watch their DVD.
These days there's sort of a lot of apathy.
I guess there's always going to be issues, so there's always going to be a job to do.
As long as people call themselves punks, I suppose it has a future.